Okay. Alright, we'll get started soon, everybody. How are we doing today? I'll put the link up as well. You'll probably need the link. Okay. Hello people, how are we doing? Is the audio working okay? It's alright. Okay. I can just sit here for like half an hour, that's a thing. Hello, how's it going? Anything in particular you want to look at today? Oh, hang on a second. That's not great. Let's see, we're having some live stream issues, probably due to the Wi-Fi. One moment. Oh, right, okay. That should be a little bit better. Okay, and we're back. Sorry about that. Let's just quickly check the microphone volume. Oh yeah, that could go up a bit. Let's just push that up to about there, maybe. A bit more. Of course, hang on a second. Okay, I think that should be a little bit better. Alright, how's the volume now? Okay, I think the volume should be a lot better now. We'll see how we go. Yeah, what do we want to talk about today, people? Also, sorry about the video issues just there. That should all be a bit better now. Okay, glad that's a bit better now. Okay, yeah, what do we want to talk about today? Whoops. Okay, yeah, what do we want to talk about today, everybody? Will the Google Map API be tested in the exam? Yes, I know that it does appear in a couple of past exam questions, but I would say you're less likely to get a question about the Maps API in this year's exam. Certainly not more than what was covered in lectures, which was a fairly limited overview of the Maps API. So can't say 100% certain, but can sort of give you that hint. What else are we wanting to talk about? Presumably we want to talk about some exam related stuff. I'll just put that on the list over here. When will the marks be out for the group project? Okay, so yeah, the marks will be out for the group project by the end of next week. So ideally a little bit earlier. So exam and also yeah, so the marks for the group project will be out around probably middle of next week, if not out a little bit sooner. It's going to be a bit dependent on time, as is most things like this, and some of these things take longer to mark than others, but certainly by the end of next week for sure. Hello, welcome. Feel free to add to the discussion there, anything that you want to talk about specifically this week. I don't have anything planned, but I figured that people will probably want to be talking about the exam or questions from the previous exams that you're studying. Security related stuff and stuff related to the current pracs that are up at the moment, and also the quiz. So again, if you have specific questions, feel free to throw them in there. And we can go ahead and take a look at them. Just going to check to see if anyone actually did put something on the forum post, because I did leave a spot there for people to write questions. Nope, that's all good. We should put that one up a little sooner. That's okay. As I said, I don't have anything in particular prepared for today, so it's all whatever you all want to discuss. And if there's not anything in particular that we want to look at today, then this is probably going to be a very short live stream, but we'll see if anybody else has any ideas. Welcome to those of you who've just joined us. Tell you what, while we are waiting for anyone else who has particular ideas on what we might want to talk about today, we could try a couple of cross-site scripting exercises and see how we go with those. So if you've been following along with the, can you give some tips about how to review the chapter of client, server, and Node.js? Okay, tips about client, server, and Node.js. Yeah, we did talk about a lot in there. So I think you want to start by making sure that you understand the basic concept of HTTP requests and what HTTP requests are, and maybe start by just trying to write out some HTTP requests manually in a telnet terminal, which we did a brief example of during one lecture, but try writing out some HTTP requests manually just to get sort of an idea of the requests on the very low level, or at the very least inspect some, go back into Insomnia and inspect some of the requests that you're seeing. So once you've got a solid grasp on the basics of HTTP and HTTP requests, then we can start looking at, I guess, AJAX as being slightly different from regular dynamic web pages, but also realistically not different at all because they're all just HTTP requests. Make sure that you understand that a HTTP is a stateless protocol, which means that you'll need to know how we deal with maintaining state in our web applications, and that's through the use of cookies and sessions. I think those are the key things. What did I say in my last Wednesday lecture? I know I put it in here somewhere. Let's see, last Wednesday's lecture. 7, 8, 12, 13, 6. 13, 6. Yes, it was. Also make sure you go back to the very first lecture where we talked about the TCP/IP model of the internet, and that you understand how the basics of HTTP relate to that model. And once you understand the basics of HTTP and the different types of requests and responses and how that all roughly maps out and how that fits into the TCP/IP model of the internet, then that's when you can start going back and reviewing your server code and how the different HTTP requests fit in with the Express server and the Express's framework. And you can also start to then look at how routes and middleware are related to each other and what they do, and make sure you're familiar with how to handle a request as it goes through a route, and also write some basic middleware and use that to handle multiple different types of requests or different requests as they come through the system. I think if you can do all of those bits and pieces, then you're probably going to be well set for the exam. So I'm not sure how well that answers your question. Do you have any more specific questions in there, or about different parts of the client server in Node.js? I think probably, I guess the main thing is to actually try all the bits and pieces. Try manually writing requests. Try inspecting requests in Insomnia. Write some middleware. Write some basic routes. Write some Ajax code and see how it works differently. So go back and revisit the pracs. And I think if you can do all of that and understand what it's doing, then that should give you the understanding and tools that you need in order to succeed in the exam. As I mentioned, it's not going to be strictly about writing code, but understanding what the code that you've been writing is doing will help you to better understand the core concepts of that section. Yeah. Can we please talk about SQL injection and cross-site scripting? Okay, yeah, SQL injection and cross-site scripting. So, okay, I guess we'll start with cross-site scripting. So, okay, glad you get the idea now. That's good. I went a bit around the place on that. But, okay, cross-site scripting. So, in the practical, Prac 10, there is a website that I point you all at. So let's take a look at that website. The website itself doesn't it comes with some basic explanation with it, and it kind of builds you up, but it helps to have a basic understanding of what's going on. So we can work through a couple of these exercises, and we'll see what we get. So this is the cross-site scripting game here, and I can't remember if it tells me where we're up to or whether it just goes straight in to it. No, it goes from the very top. Okay. All right. So cross-site scripting, the idea is that you take a piece of JavaScript code and you get it to appear in a web page somewhere where it's not meant to be, and then that code runs for yourself or for someone else. Now, the most basic form of cross-site scripting typically will only apply to you, the person running it. So for example, here we have a like a little search engine or something like that. So let's take a quick look at this. So if I type something in here, ASDF, and click search, it goes, okay, sorry, no results were found for ASDF. So it takes that piece of text that I wrote in the previous text box, and it displays it back on the page in a way that I can see it. So if we inspect, where is it? Where's my inspector? So if we inspect that, okay, so you know what, I'm going to put my inspector to the side here rather than down the bottom. Where is it? There we go, up to the right. There we go. Okay. All right. So you can see it's put it in a bold tag. So we could theoretically, and it's just taken the code as it was. But you'll notice that I can also write, for example, hello. And suddenly, wait, that hello, the I didn't appear there. Well, the tags, they don't appear as text. They're actually applied to the elements. So if we look at this element here, previously it said hello just in bold. Now it's in bold and in italics. So when this page loads, the script is getting run. And in fact, you can see the script is actually getting passed in this URL query up here. So we could, for example, run maybe a script in here. So let's go ahead and do that. So script. In fact, actually, I'm just going to go back and try again because this has to be properly URL parameterized. So we'll write our script in here, script, and we just want to pop up an alert box. So if I go ahead and do that, script, and now if I click on search, it should run that JavaScript as a tag, or as a script. It should treat these script tags as tags rather than as plain text, and then it'll run this script. Let's do that. There we go, and it just happens that this website is very smart and it's actually able to pick up on that and tell me, hey, we did the right thing. So let's move on. So that in its sense is the most basic form of cross-site scripting, but we can go ahead and do some slightly more advanced things. So for example, that script that we just looked at is all well and good. It's fine, but it's essentially harmless because it's only displayed back to me as the person viewing that page. So I type the text in, I click search, it gets displayed straight back to me. It doesn't get stored anywhere and then presented back to other users. And that's the danger with cross-site scripting. It's that this piece of script, this code, will get stored and displayed back to other users. So in this case here, oh look, we've got like this chat client where you have posts or like blog posts or something, and we want to get the alert popping up in here. That's the goal each time, or at least for the first few of these, the goal is to pop up an alert box. And we've got another text box here that we can type into, and it's like, oh cool, this is your personal stream. And just to give us a little bit of a clue what we're dealing with, we notice that it actually supports italics over here and different colored text over here. So I can type in, again, I can type in what? Something like that, and I can go share status and it's what? That's nice. All right. So, so in theory, we could just try doing the same thing. And alert. So we could just try doing this for a start. And that's all well and good. And you'll notice that, and this was actually the problem we ran into in the lecture when we demonstrated this. So if I inspect that code there, you'll see that, where is it? No, that's, me span block quote. So it's put the script tag in here, but the script hasn't actually been run because it's not getting, yes, Guy. Yes, so it's relatively harmless, but yes, you could provide that link to someone and it would appear. So this is something that's certainly could be used as part of a phishing attack. So you could provide that link to someone, and they see that, oh, okay, it's a legitimate link to Google or wherever it is, and go, okay, well, sure, this is a legitimate link to Google, so why wouldn't I trust this? And then they click on it, and yeah, and then you can play that code back. So yes, it is still dangerous, but it's less dangerous than getting something actually embedded into a website that other people are going to view without expecting it. Like if you were to send that link in like an email or something, because you're not going to be doing this to your friends. I mean, okay, you might be doing this to your friends like a little bit, but nothing malicious. Don't do anything malicious. So you know, it's like, how is this attack going to reach people? They have to click on the link, they have to follow the link and go to the page. Whereas if it's already built into a page that they're already going to visit, that's something that they use, then that's where things start getting dangerous, because they implicitly trust that if, you know, if I go to MySpace and I log into my profile page, and if I view somebody else's profile page, I don't expect that it's going to automatically make me friends with some random and then post on my page a status that causes everybody who views that particular post to become friends with this same random person, which is a thing that actually happened. And then everybody on MySpace was friends with Sammy. True story. Going off topic a little bit here. Yes, so still dangerous. Yes, slightly less dangerous. So again, we're trying to attack this site here. Now the problem that we had here was that because the code is getting loaded dynamically using JavaScript and Ajax, the script tag itself doesn't get executed when it gets placed onto the page. It has to be triggered, because it would normally get executed when it's rendered in. But in the case of Ajax, script tags don't get executed when they get rendered in, presumably for security reasons. So what we're going to do instead is we need to find a way to trigger that script. So maybe we could do something like, okay, well, what if I have like a button element? And then I can have like an onClick. OnClick equals and alert. So we get the alert to pop up whenever I click the button. It's like, oh, click me. Again, like, okay, so like it's made the button appear on the page, and I click me, and it's like, oh, cool, we did the thing. We probably want this to run by default though, so the best way to go about having it run by default when the page loads is to have an event that occurs when an element loads. So we could maybe try something like, okay, a paragraph, and we have like an onload. So when the element loads, we run alert. Again, that may or may not work for security reasons. Alright, so there's our alert there, so don't know why I pressed K, let's try that. Share status. Doesn't quite work. Again, for security reasons, the onload prevents it from running, but an interesting one is the image tag, and in fact I think if you look at the hints for this one, it'll start talking about the image tag. So, and this was the one I used in lectures. So image tag has an on error, and the on error runs whenever there's an error loading the image. So if we give it an image that doesn't load and give it a piece of script that runs when the image doesn't load, it'll try to load the image, that'll fail, and that's going to run our code. So let's try that. Okay, so we got what? That's all right. And we're going to need a source equals blah, blah, blah. That image, of course, doesn't exist. And then we're also probably will just want an alt for good measure. And then we end our image tag. Let's give that a go. Okay, so that triggered the same error message that we just got. Well, that triggered the same piece of code. So that was a basic cross-site scripting attack. Oh, okay. So that's the basics of what we're aiming for. Anytime you have a place where you can input more than just basic text, and that information is getting stored on your server and regurgitated back to other users, is a potential cross-site scripting vulnerability, especially if, as I said, if it's more than just plain text. So if it accepts HTML, then you have a potential cross-site scripting vulnerability. And you can address it by using, there's a couple ways you can address it. Preferably you just don't display formatted HTML back to the end user. So you don't let users submit HTML, and then you don't take whatever they submit and display it as HTML. So if you see in a web page the use of like, so if you have like something like document dot get element by ID, I don't know. So we have some element on the page and it's like, oh yeah, okay, we'll just do the lazy thing, which is .inner HTML equals, and this is, you know, whatever the value of a variable is, or maybe it's the stuff that you're pulling out of the database. If the stuff that you're pulling out of the database happens to be HTML and could be rendered into HTML when you call this this particular piece of code here, then that's a potential vulnerability, at least on the client side. Sometimes you do need to store HTML, in which case there are libraries available to sanitize your code. And in fact, you'll find that there's a sanitization library in place in the Prac 10 code for picking up HTML that's being sent through and escaping it, so that you know, when you have like a tag like this, it renders as that tag and everything gets escaped appropriately, rather than getting turned into HTML elements when it gets put back on the page. So if you're trying to protect on the client side, the way that you would go about doing it is use inner text instead of inner HTML. That's again, of course, assuming that you do not have, that's assuming that the stuff that you're sending back is not formatted HTML. If it is going to be formatted HTML and you are going to accept formatted HTML, then you need to use some kind of library on the server side to sanitize your code. Right, so that's cross-site scripting. Any thoughts or questions about cross-site scripting before we move on? Yes, inner text is the simplest way to mitigate cross-site scripting. If you don't need to send, if the data that you're sending back doesn't need to be formatted HTML data, then you shouldn't use inner HTML to render it onto the page. You should just use inner text if possible. In some cases, it's easier to use inner HTML because you can just grab the contents of an element, which might include any tags that belong to that element, and then render a bunch of stuff into there. But ultimately, you're better off taking the time to actually render it into individual elements. And so what I mean by that is, so for example, if I have, actually, you know what, do I still have, so document.inner HTML. So like, it's very easy to do inner HTML plus equals, and then like a paragraph tag, and then, you know, variable and where a variable happens to contain the text that I got from wherever I got it. And you're like, oh, I can just put this on the page, and that's all well and good. And I can't type today, apparently. So you're like, oh, cool, I'll just put this on the page, and it'll take whatever the current inner HTML of the element is, and it's going to append that paragraph to it, and it's going to put variable inside. But of course, if variable contains HTML, that's a pain. You can't just do inner text, because if you do inner text plus equals, then this paragraph tag isn't going to render quite so nicely. So you have to do a little bit of extra work to make this happen. So what you'd need to do is you'd need to do document dot create element. So you'd have to create a paragraph element and assign it to something. Hey Lachlan, we've talked just a little bit about what kind of stuff would happen server side, or at least what a good way to prepare for client server stuff in the exam is. But if you have specific exam questions, feel free to post them just there, and we can talk about those in a bit more detail. Absolutely. So we can have, so continuing on, we can have this paragraph element here, and we can say, right, p dot inner text equals variable, and then dot append child brackets. So it takes a little bit of extra work to do that, and obviously if you have a more complicated element that you're trying to render that consists of, you know, a bunch of different tags that all combine together and all have to have different formatting and all have to, it's a lot easier sometimes to just like write out the HTML, and you're really tempted to use inner HTML to just be like, oh, I'll just mash everything together, write out the HTML and dump it straight into the page. This is why something like Vue is so powerful, because when you're using a framework like Vue, when you create your templates in Vue, you're creating the template as a HTML template, and the stuff that you put inside your moustaches in Vue, which are the variables, are automatically treated as text, not HTML. You have to explicitly tell the system, no, 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 I want this to be HTML if you want it to be HTML. So that's just another fantastic reason why Vue is so great. So yes, it is easy to sort of, it is easy to mitigate, but it also takes a bit more effort than just, hopefully it's easier to see why these sort of vulnerabilities creep in, because it does take some effort to mitigate them. As I mentioned earlier, there are times when you do want HTML being rendered, in which case do something on the server side, and in the Prac 10 code you'll see examples of stuff being sanitized on the server side using a sanitization module that you can then apply to anything that gets sent over to the server, and it will go through and it'll sanitize it and remove any of the nasty stuff that could be in there for a cross-site scripting attack. And those libraries are usually quite well maintained. If you pick, well, as long as you pick one that's well maintained, it'll usually be able to handle some more advanced attacks where people might try to encode their text in such a way that it doesn't immediately get treated as HTML, it might be treated as HTML tags a little bit later on, and having a library that goes the extra mile to clear all that out is always handy. So yeah, that's that. All right, so SQL injection. Let's talk about SQL injection. What I will say regarding SQL injection is we've talked about it in fairly reasonable detail in the lecture where we talked about what is SQL injection, and you saw us working through the process of actually getting a SQL injection or putting together a SQL injection query. I would super highly recommend that you watch this video just here. Actually, both of these videos for good measure, but this one is an introduction video that just goes over the basic concept, and this one right here goes in a reasonable amount of depth and detail about, okay, what actually can happen. Let's make some more, rather than just talking about the theory, let's actually make some attacks against a website for a store, then, you know, and it shows you how you can combine different sets of statements and things to actually attack. It also talks about how you can go about probing a website that you haven't seen before to try and figure out, is this vulnerable to a SQL injection attack? If so, what can we do? How can we actually make the attack work? And that sort of thing. So this one, absolutely 100% worth a watch, and it's better than anything that I can tell you or give a demonstration of for you right now. So 100% this video right here. I'll wait for you to go watch it. I'm not going to wait for you to go watch it. It's a solid half hour, but it's definitely worth it. Yeah. That said, if you have specific questions about SQL injection, feel free to ask them and we can take a look. One of the 27... Right, no, jQuery is not expected knowledge this year, other than maybe it exists and it's a thing that helps make writing regular JavaScript easier. If ever a jQuery question would appear, it wouldn't be more complicated than that, so I would say, yeah, probably not. I wouldn't be expecting jQuery. I would be expecting Vue in the exam, but I wouldn't be expecting jQuery. We didn't cover Vue at all last year, so it was purely JavaScript and jQuery. So Vue is the new jQuery this year, and we're doing it because it's more powerful and it's better than jQuery. And frameworks, client-side frameworks like React, Vue, and Angular are where things have come to, whereas jQuery was where things were a solid sort of 5 to 8 years ago. Actually, even 5 to 10 years ago was sort of where jQuery was most prominent. Anyway, that was just a little aside history on jQuery. No, you're not expected to know much, if anything, about jQuery. Could I go through some potential questions that may be asked about Vue? Yeah, sure. I guess the kind of thing that you might be expecting to see in an exam, like the one that you'll be doing shortly, is that, and I don't really have any examples handy, but maybe you'll get like a snippet of HTML. And something like, I don't know, equals, and then I don't know, let me just quickly set my highlighting to HTML here for good measure. Highlighting markup. Okay, alright, so it's not how you close a UL tag. Alright, so unordered list, that's all well and good. And maybe you have something like and I don't know, bar. And then also maybe, I don't know, like, and I don't know. Okay, and then maybe also something like, okay, my style is, my style, sure. All right, so you might have like something like this for your HTML, and then you might get asked about, okay, what might the JavaScript for this look like? Or assuming that you use, so I guess probably a more advanced question on something like Vue would be to say, okay, well, looking at this piece of HTML just here, what might some Vue look like? Or maybe you'll get given some Vue. So new Vue, now I'm trying to remember what Vue looks like. And I think it was PL. All right, so I think that's a little bit of basic Vue code that we've got going on there. And okay, so I guess what are the data properties that we'll have in this thing? So we're going to have something like so I'll just put this in a script tag so that it renders properly, or colors properly rather. Script. And so, as you can all tell by my sheer silence that I'm thinking very hard about and making this Vue code up as I'm going. That's all right, so there's that. And also sure, okay, that'll do. Yeah, so you might, so you could potentially get asked what I mentioned before, which would be something like, okay, maybe write some Vue code to go with this piece of HTML, or you could get asked something like, take a look at this whole thing that we've got going on here, this whole piece of Vue and corresponding HTML, based on the values that are set in that Vue code. Explain, or maybe like draw or something like that, what the resulting page is going to look like from something like this. So that's going to require you to understand, you know, the basic different directives, how they all interact with each other, how the view data object all works, that sort of thing. Or, you know, maybe we'll have like a method or something that has a button. It's like, okay, like what happens when you click on the button? Or so for example, maybe I've got a button here. So if the first question was, what does the page look like when it loads, and maybe a follow-up question could be something like, so you could have something like just on click. Something like that. Can't remember if that's correct code or not. Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, why not? We'll leave it there. Yeah, so then you might get asked, okay, like what happens when I click the button, and how does the page change, or draw what the page looks like when the button gets changed, or something like that. So, or maybe you'll have something like an AJAX request sets the contents of foo to be, you know, maybe this data property changes like to something else. What changes on the page, or how does that change affect the page? So there's a few different sorts of questions that you could get asked, but they'll all very much be in the same similar types of questions as what you would have seen for some of the jQuery stuff in previous exams. So sort of just replace jQuery with Vue in some of them, and that gets similar sorts of questions to that. And also similar to like the JavaScript questions that you'll see. So some of the JavaScript questions will say, write a piece of code to do this, or like here's a piece of HTML, take this piece of HTML and write some JavaScript to do, you know, X, Y, and Z. And then like a follow-up question might be something like, okay, how would you do the same thing but using Vue instead of JavaScript? So there's a bunch of different ways that a question on Vue could go, and hopefully that gives you some idea of the different sorts of things that you might encounter, and helps you with your revision. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other questions for this evening, or any other specific questions? Hello! Nice to have you with us, although I get the feeling that we're just about to wrap up unless you have any particular questions that you'd like to ask. Yeah, I feel that. So, all right, well, can you explain this one? Cognitive and kinematic load. Will Google APIs be asked in the exam, or something similar to that in user interface? Okay. All right, so a few different questions there. Okay, so the first one is cognitive and kinematic load. So we talked about that in the We talked about cognitive and kinematic load in the user experience section of the course. That was in week 6. So you want to check out the Wednesday and Friday of week 6 lectures for your basic notes on cognitive and kinematic load. So I guess in a nutshell, cognitive load is how much thought does it require me in order to complete a given task. So for example, logging into your website, how much do I have to think about the different parts and of the task of logging in? Because I may have been through 100 different login forms before, so I guess is your login form straightforward enough for me as someone who has experience with lots of different login forms, but at the same time, is it intuitive and simple enough that someone who's never seen a login form before can get a basic understanding of what it's asking you to do? So ideally, I shouldn't have to think about anything in your web applications. It should be so intuitive and natural that I can just do it without thinking. That's the ideal scenario. So cognitive load, how much thought do I have to put into doing a specific task? And so maybe like, in order to use a feature of your website, I have to go through a bunch of different menus and navigate through a bunch of different options. That's going to be a high cognitive load. Whereas maybe there's an icon on your page, which it's very clear what the icon is. Maybe, again, it's like a login button. So it uses maybe like the standard little picture of a person and the word login next to it. And it's like, oh, okay, right. Well, clearly this is the login section of the web page. So that it's perfectly clear what's going on. Whereas maybe you put the login button in like the bottom right corner of the page and you write the button in, I don't know, Norwegian? Sure, Norwegian. You write the button in Norwegian, you use the save button icon, for instance, instead of the standard little, like either a door icon or like person icon for the login. It's like, well, that's completely counterintuitive, and I have to actually stop and think about it and try and look around your website and find the thing that I'm looking for. So that's what cognitive load is. Kinematic load is how much physical effort it requires me to do something. So for example, maybe you take your login button, you put it down in like the bottom left corner here, and it's actually like a really small button. So so maybe actually it's like maybe the login button's in the middle of the page and it's this tiny little box just there, and I'm just like, oh, okay, I have to click on the login button and like getting my mouse over to it. It takes me time to firstly physically locate it, because if it's not in the place that I expect it to be, then I have to start hunting for it, which means I have to look around. So that's physical looking from me in order to do the thing that I'm trying to do. And then I have to move my mouse over to the login button, and maybe the login button has several steps, so I have to like, I have to click on this, and I have to go into this submenu, I have to go into this other submenu, then I have to go down and find the thing that I want. And it's like, if it's a very common task, maybe it makes more sense for it to just be available on like a right-click menu right next to my mouse. That didn't take much kinematic load. Similarly, something like the cross to exit my program. I've got my cross up here in the top right corner of the screen, and if I want to exit a window and the window is maximized to full screen, it has a very low kinematic load, because I can just take my mouse and I can zoop all the way up to the right hand side, then just move back a little bit and I'm there. So kinematic load, how much physical effort is required for me to perform a certain task. So ideally you want to minimize both of these, and there's a whole field of user interface design that goes into what are some of the different ways that we could minimize cognitive load and kinematic load. But those are sort of the two of the main principles in making your user interfaces as usable as possible. Someone asks, will Google APIs be asked in the exam or any other sort similar to that? Yes, I know that there are some API questions in previous exams. You're less likely to get an API question in this exam, given that we only spent one lecture on the Google API and we kind of raced through it pretty quickly. If there is any questions about the APIs or any of the APIs, you can expect a similar level of detail. Maybe something like OpenID, where we talked about the concept, because the implementation itself is relatively straightforward, but the concept itself requires a little bit more thought, and we have come back to it a few different times when talking about security and user interfaces. So maybe some fundamental understanding of what OpenID is, how it works, why it's important. Maybe a little bit less so on the Maps APIs. You're much less likely to see something on the Maps API, but you may see a little bit on OpenID, especially in the security section of the course. Yeah. All right, and that's another batch of me talking. So do we have any other questions while we're on it, or? Or not? All right, people. Okay, going once. Going to, oh, okay, nope, there we go. All good. So, last time you said this exam will be changing too much. I'm just curious, types, okay. So, the question is, I said the exam will be different from previous years, and a lot of that is to reflect what has changed in the course from previous years of the course. So as some of you have noted, there are parts of the exam that you've seen when you've looked back at previous exams and you've gone, we didn't talk about that at all in the course this time around. And in that case, you shouldn't expect to see it in this year's exam. So what types of questions will be changing? I suppose overall the types of questions that you'll be seeing won't be changing that much from previous years, but the way the exam is structured is a little bit different. It's the questions, I've tried to weight them more proportionally to how much time we spent on them in the lectures, and we spent some more time on some sections this year than we did previous years. So you should see that reflected in some sense. So I guess the main one would be the addition of Vue into the course. We also put a bit more of a focus on Ajax this time around than previously. What else? We did spend some time talking about the TCP/IP model of the internet, and a bit more time talking about basic theory of how all of those sort of services fit together to give you HTTP, the protocol, and the web pages, and all of those basics. So a bit more of an emphasis on how all of that comes together and how the different concepts relate to each other, as opposed to previous exams where we may not have spent as much time on how the different bits and pieces all relate to each other. So it won't be hugely different. And the differences that you see should reflect what we covered and what we spent time on in the course. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. No, I think off the top of my head, user interface and user experience, maybe a little bit, but probably not so. Probably not any more than previous years, yeah. Describe my experience on traveling with you over this semester. I would describe my experience as probably too ambitious in all the changes that were made to the course this year, but glad that they were made, which means that next year's going to be a little bit smoother. Can you just ignore exam papers before 2018? I would say anything before you could certainly get away with ignoring anything before 2016. I think 2016 and 2017 still have some decent stuff in them. In fact, so any exam paper that's marked as a first year exam paper, so anything with the course code CompSci 1105, I think it is. CompSci 1105 was what Web and Database was before it was switched to second year, so you can certainly give less precedence to those, and you'll probably see questions on things like jQuery and handlebars and other stuff, maybe Angular, that just hasn't been covered by us at all. So I think it certainly hasn't. I don't think the exam has changed so radically that they're completely useless to you. But I wouldn't get hung up on them, if that makes sense. Why was it changed to a second year course? Because there's just too darn much in here for it to be a first year course. Yeah, I think that's one of the things. And also, as a first year course, it was basically open to it was open to everybody. There were no prerequisites to it. So if you have, you'd have students who were doing IP at the same time or hadn't done any programming background coming into a course where we're trying to deliver programming fundamentals in asynchronous programming, which you've all done through Ajax. So like event-driven programming, and then also markup languages, database languages, and all of that stuff. And for anyone coming in to have that as their first experience, where we've got so much different stuff and so many concepts, is just absolutely daunting. So partly that, and also because it didn't used to be a core course, and now it is a core course, and so making sure that everybody who is taking the course has done or is currently doing OOP. I think that was one big thing, and then the other thing is in making it a core course, we want to make sure that we're covering some more advanced material, such as networking fundamentals, database fundamentals in a bit more detail, those sorts of things. And those aren't necessarily subjects that we want to be giving immediately to first year students. So ensuring that the level of the students doing the course is sufficient for the course itself, I suppose, which comes back to the first point anyways. So that's probably the main thing. I can't say I truly know all of the reasoning, because it certainly wasn't a decision that I was involved in at the time that this did happen, but that's what I understand it to be, yeah. Yes, there are a few of them in here. And generally the expectation is if you're taking OOP or have completed OOP and are still a first year student, that's okay. You should still have some the fundamental programming knowledge to pick things up, but I probably think I'll put more of an emphasis on ensuring that people have a bit more experience coming into the course next time around, because I realize in hindsight that there are first year students who might be here for their first semester, but are taking OOP at the same time, decided they wanted to take Web and Database early and got thrown into the deep end, as it were. So yeah. I guess I'll add one last thing for you, Jin, there. As far as the exam papers, start at 2018 and work your way back, and ignore any content that wasn't covered in lectures for the course. That's probably what I go with that. Alright, all good. Well, that's what I'm here for. So this will be the last live stream. I suppose I should add that this is the last live stream for the semester, but I will be available for consulting next week during the usual time, and if you'll have specific things that you want to talk about, or if that time doesn't work for you, zap me an email. I'll try to get back to it. I know a number of you have emailed me over the past 4 weeks, and I haven't responded to some of those. So I am slowly working through that backlog, but if people are requesting time to meet up and discuss certain things, or if you have certain questions and you can't make it to the regular consulting time, feel free to hit me up and we can work something out. Or actually, come to think of it, in the first instance, ask your questions on the forums. That's always a good one. That's usually a great place to start, and if you have further questions, we can go from there. And on that note, I think we're going to call it for the evening. All good. I think if it helps, then, and also saves a bit of, it does save some of, part of it is because it does save some of my time if I can answer all of your questions as a group on the stream, as opposed to seeing you all individually and answering the same questions over and over again. So yes, but you're all welcome. Thanks for joining me for the streams and asking great questions, and also for coming along to lectures and putting together some really great websites. It was great to see all the different things that everybody had for your group projects over the semester. So well done. Good luck in the exam. And well, yeah, good luck in the exam. I'll see you then. So we just had a new question show up. Interesting. About to sign off there. I inspected that my Google Place API got 100% error for requests sent in these days. Probably that's the examiner marking my project. Will this severely affect the mark? Don't know, hard to say. I'm not sure that the other markers have actually started marking yet. So I'm sure that's a discussion we'll be having over the coming days. But Place API, yeah. We'll let you know if we run into specific issues with the Place API not working. As far as I understand it, with the Google APIs, you do need to add a credit card to it, but once you add a credit card to it, you have around 28,000 requests that you can make against the API. They give you a credit of $200 a month against the API, which is about 28,000 requests that you can make before you actually get charged anything. So we're not going to be making any more than, well, we're not going to be making 28,000 requests against your API. So if you can, I'd go ahead and do that. Yeah. And in lecture W513, last slide, you give us a question like drawing an ER model, but last night I did it, just kind of confusing about this drawing. You give us a question on drawing. Nice. Guys, I'm gonna have to call it there. Vikeji, drop that on the post that one on the discussion forum, and post the example of what you came up with, and ask everybody what they think, and we'll see what people come up with as far as as what they think of your ER model. Alright guys, come on, it's almost 10 o'clock. That's it's been yeah, okay, I realized that we did do like a 3-hour stream that one time, but I'm trying to keep these things to 1 hour, so thanks a lot, have a good one, best of luck, catch you at the exam.